Alright guys, this is going to be question number 15 from section C. We are going to talk about the facial nerve. Okay, now before we start the facial nerve, we're going to talk about its nuclei. The facial nerve, first of all, is going to emerge at the caudal section of the pons. Okay, now at the caudal section of the pons, you're going to have three nuclei that are going to give rise to the facial nerve. Okay, the first nuclei is going to be bronchiomotor. Okay, and bronchiomotor is going to give motor innervation for the facial expression muscles. Okay, so once again, bronchiomotor is going to give off the motor innervation for facial expression muscles. The second nucleus is going to be visceromotor, and visceromotor nucleus is going to be called the superior salivatory nucleus, and the superior salivatory nucleus is going to give off preganglionic parasympathetic secretory fibers. Okay. Now, when thinking about visceromotor, try to always remember that's going to be a parasympathetic nucleus, always going to give parasympathetic fibers. Okay, in this case, the superior salivatory nucleus is going to give off parasympathetic fibers to the pterygopalatine ganglion. It's going to give off parasympathetic fibers to the submandibular ganglion, and etc., etc. Okay, now the viscerosensory nucleus. Okay, it's going to receive taste fibers. Now, when thinking of viscerosensory, viscera means organ, and sensory obviously means sensory. So basically, you're going to receive sensory information about the organs. Now, because the taste fibers are part of the oral cavity, it's going to be inside your body. Therefore, it's going to be an organ of the oral cavity. And basically, in your solitary nucleus, you're going to have taste fibers, which are from the pseudo-unipolar cells, which are in the genicular ganglion. And in the genicular ganglion, these fibers are going to terminate in the solitary nucleus. Okay, so sorry, that was a bit confusing. I said that a little bit confusingly. Basically, in the solitary nucleus, you're going to have taste fibers from the genicular ganglion terminating there. Okay, and those are your three nuclei. Now we're going to take a look at the cross section. Okay, in the cross section, you can see that the caudal cross section is going to be differentiated by two things primarily. One is that you can see the external genu, okay, or the bend of the bronchiomotor nucleus bending around the somatomotor nucleus of the abducens. You know that this is the caudal section of the pons because the facial nerve will be emerging, and also the abducens nerve will be emerging. Let's see, well, if this is number 10 is the lateral meniscus. This is not. I was just checking if the vestibular nucleus and the cochlear nucleus were in the same cross-section, but they're not. Regardless, this is the caudal section of the pons, so we've already identified one nucleus of the facial nerve. That is going to be the bronchiomotor nucleus. You also have a visceromotor. Okay, that's right here. That's going to be your superior salivatory nucleus. Okay, and then you're going to have your viscerosensory, which is going to be your solitary nucleus. And these three nuclei will give rise to the facial nerve, and it will exit the pons at the pontocerebellar margin. Okay, so let's go to the actual scheme of the facial nerve. Okay, let's readjust this camera. So you're going to have these three nuclei, the bronchiomotor, the visceromotor, the viscerosensory. They're going to join, create the facial nerve. Okay, the facial nerve would then enter the internal acoustic meatus, which is part of the pubis part of the temporal bone. It's going to enter the internal acoustic meatus, therefore entering the facial canal. Okay, and in the facial canal, the facial nerve will continue down and will exit the stylomastoid foramen. And once it exits the stylomastoid foramen, it's going to give off a posterior auricular branch. It's going to give off a stylohyoid branch, and then the posterior belly of digastric. Okay, and then it's going to give off its parotid plexus, which will divide the submandibular. The parotid plexus is going to divide the parotid gland into a superficial and a deep part, and the parotid plexus is going to innervate all muscles of facial expression. Now, the branches in parotid plexus, I haven't listed it here, I was a bit lazy, but you have your deep temporal branch. Actually, I believe it's just temporal. You're going to have your zygomatic, you're going to have your buccal, you're going to have your margin mandibular, and you're going to have your cervical branch. Okay, so there are 5 branches. Okay, and this is the famous parotid plexus branch that if you put your entire hand, if you were to do this with your hand and put it on the side of your face, you could actually estimate where all the branches are. Okay, so once again, you have your temporal branch, your zygomatic branch, your buccal branch, your margin mandibular branch, and your cervical branch. Now, what's important about the cervical branch is that the cervical branch is going to anastomose, it's going to continue inferiorly, and it's going to anastomose with the transverse cervical branch, and it's going to create the superficial cervical ansa. Okay? Now, going back up to the facial canal, let's go to the genicular ganglion. Okay, this genicular ganglion has all the pseudo-unipolar cells. Okay, and therefore all the taste fibers. Okay, and all these taste fibers are going to go back this way to the viscerosensory nucleus and terminate there in the solitary nucleus. Okay, now going here, you know that the facial nerve is going to go through the genicular ganglion, and then it's going to exit the genicular ganglion through the hiatus for the lesser, not the greater, the lesser petrosal nerve, and it's going to go into the cranial cavity this way. Okay? Now, once the facial nerve goes to the hiatus for the lesser petrosal, it's going to come out as the greater petrosal nerve. Okay? Now, the greater petrosal nerve carries secretory fibers for the lacrimal, nasal, and palatal glands. Okay? Now, the greater petrosal nerve, if you guys remember, is going to go through foramen lacerum. The lesser petrosal nerve is going to go through foramen ovale. Don't get that confused. After the greater petrosal goes to foramen lacerum, it's going to enter the pterygoid canal. Okay? And pass through the pterygoid canal and go to the pterygopalatine ganglion. Okay, and here the greater petrosal, okay, it's going to give off secretory fibers for the lacrimal, nasal, and palatal glands. Okay, now that's the first branch. In the facial facial canal, there are 3 branches that are going to come off the facial nerve. The first one was the greater petrosal. The second one is just going to be a stapedius nerve, which will go to the stapedius muscle. Okay? And then there will be the chorda tympani. The chorda tympani is actually kind of important. Okay? First of all, in the tympanic cavity, beneath the mucosa, you're going to find your chorda tympani, which are encompassed by the anterior and posterior malleolar folds. Now, the chorda tympani is important because it carries taste fibers for the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, okay, and also it's going to carry the preganglionic fibers, okay, the preganglion parasympathetic fibers for the submandibular and sublingual glands. Now how it's going to do that is first it's going to go through the petrotympanic fissure, and then once it goes through the petrotympanic fissure, it's going to leave that part and join with the lingual. As you see, the lingual is going down to the submandibular ganglion. Okay, let's take a look. Let's readjust. Now, the lingual is on its way to the submandibular ganglion. Okay, and the lingual is carrying the sensory innervation for the anterior two-thirds of the tongue. So the chorda tympani joins with the lingual. Okay, and therefore the parasympathetic fibers of the chorda tympani, the taste fibers, are going to reach the submandibular ganglion. Okay, and the submandibular ganglion is going to receive the parasympathetic preganglionic fibers from the chorda tympani for the submandibular and the sublingual glands. Okay, and that pretty much is the facial nerve. Now let's take a quick look in the book. Let's see. Probably going to be page 122. Yep, I was right. Now, okay, so you have your facial nuclei, okay, and right here, I believe is going to be the facial nerve, right here, okay, and the facial nerve, this is going to be the first branch. First of all, I believe this should be the geniculate ganglion, okay, the facial nerve geniculate ganglion. Coming out is going to be the greater petrosal. It's going to be joined by the deep petrosal from the internal carotid artery plexus, and this is going to create the Vidian nerve. Okay, now the Vidian nerve is going to go to the pterygopalatine ganglion. Okay, what else is here? I haven't really looked at this, so I would advise you guys just to go through this by yourself. Maybe we can go through this together. You have your nerve to the stapedius muscle right here. It's a bit unclear actually as well, but basically it's the same part. You see over here, this is where the facial nerve is coming out of the stylomastoid foramen. It's going to come out of the facial canal to the stylomastoid foramen. It's going to give off its three muscles before it gives off its parietal plexus. Actually, yeah, it's not that hard to understand. Okay, it's going to give off its greater petrosal. It's going to give off, it's somewhere along the line, it's going to give off the stapedius muscle, stapedius nerve to stapedius muscle, and it's going to give off the chorda tympani. Now, the chorda tympani should be pretty easy to distinguish. No, I don't know if I can find it. Okay, I found it right here. Okay, this I know that this is probably the chorda tympani, because once again the lingual is already on its way and the chorda tympani just joins on with it, because the lingual branch is on its way to the submandibular ganglion. So once the facial nerve is in the facial canal, it's going to give off the greater petrosal, the nerve to the stapedius, and the chorda tympani. And once it exits, it's going to give off a nerve to the stylohyoid, to the posterior auricular, and it's also going to give off its nerve to the posterior belly of the gastric. And it's important because you guys know that the posterior belly of the gastric is innervated by the facial, while the anterior belly of the gastric is innervated by the inferior alveolar nerve. It was innervated by the nerve to the anterior. It's going to be innervated by the nerve to the anterior belly of the gastric from the inferior alveolar. Okay, so know that the anterior belly and the posterior belly of the gastric are innervated by two separate nerves. it's going to come off and it's going to give off those branches before it gives off the parotid plexus in the actual parotid gland. Okay? And that is your facial nerve, guys.